Something happened in the final days of 2025 that almost nobody in the mainstream press stopped to fully explain. It looked routine on the surface. China held military drills near Taiwan. The seventh time since 2022. Same pattern, same headlines. But this drill was different in ways that matter enormously. And the gap between how it was covered and what it actually meant is what this video is about. As of today, February 19th, 2026, the United States military has quietly begun adjusting how its forces operate across the Pacific theater. No press conference announced it, no Pentagon statement declared a shift, no headline told the public that the rules of engagement had been revised. The signals are visible in deployment patterns, in repositioned carrier groups, and in what INDOPACOM commanders have been saying publicly for months. To understand what triggered this, you need to go back to December 29th, 2025, the day China launched what it officially named Justice Mission 2025. Here is what made it different from everything before it. Not the aircraft count, not the ship numbers. It was the zones China activated around Taiwan. China declared 7 maritime danger zones surrounding Taiwan simultaneously, the highest number ever recorded in a single exercise, every approach covered. But it was where those zones were placed that changed everything. They overlapped directly with Taiwan's territorial waters, not the median line, Taiwan's actual coastal boundary. That had not happened since August 2022, and August 2022 was the closest the strait had come to a genuine military crisis in a generation. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense counted 89 Chinese military aircraft in a single 24-hour period, 14 PLA Navy vessels, 14 Coast Guard ships in formation. Of those 89 aircraft sorties, more than 90 crossings of Taiwan's median line were recorded, the informal boundary that has kept both sides from direct confrontation for decades. And then came the number that should have dominated every front page. In 48 hours, China fired 27 ballistic rockets from Fujian province toward the southwest of Taiwan. 10 of those rockets landed inside Taiwan's 24 nautical mile contiguous zone, not near the center of the strait, inside the legal perimeter of Taiwan's own coastal waters. The American Enterprise Institute's China-Taiwan Crisis Tracker called it the most significant compression of strategic buffer space between Chinese forces and Taiwan ever recorded. The diplomat put it plainly. China was no longer just signaling. It was rehearsing, in precise operational detail, a quarantine of Taiwan's ports and shipping corridors. Here is the distinction most coverage ignored. A blockade is an act of war under international law. Both sides know it. The legal and military responses to it are defined and documented. A quarantine is constructed entirely differently. Beijing frames it as domestic law enforcement, conducted by Coast Guard vessels, not warships, targeting civilian ships for alleged violations. Under that framing, a foreign naval vessel trying to escort a civilian ship through is not confronting a blockade. It is, legally speaking, interfering with Chinese law enforcement. The entire legal battlefield shifts with that single reframing. And Beijing has been rehearsing this gray zone approach with increasing operational precision across multiple exercises. Coast Guard ships in tight, coordinated formation alongside PLA Navy warships. Not two separate services operating nearby, but one integrated force drilling a single documented plan. In my view, December 29th confirmed something most public analysis has been slow to say directly. China has moved from signaling into structured rehearsal for a specific contingency. The PLA published targeting materials alongside the drill, HIMARS systems, radar installations. Taiwan's 4 major deepwater ports, Keelung, Kaohsiung, Taichung, and Hualien. They also released a graphic titled Chain of Justice, a powerful arm from the Chinese mainland gripping a heavy chain wrapped tightly around Taiwan's outline. That image was not a domestic propaganda poster. It was a publicly released operational communication, a message about intent delivered in visual language requiring no translation. When Trump was asked about the drills directly, he said, "Nothing worries me about this." He noted China had drilled in the region for 20 years, a deliberate, calculated response, but it left Pacific allies unsettled. Japan condemned the drills by name. Australia called them destabilizing. The gap in tone between Washington and its partners was impossible to miss. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te addressed his country on New Year's Day 2026. This coming year will be a crucial one for Taiwan. He called for a $40 billion increase in defense spending. That proposal remains stalled in Taiwan's legislature as of this week. And Taiwan's Defense Minister Wellington Koo issued a separate warning that stopped many defense analysts cold. He said, Taiwan risks becoming numb to China's daily military pressure. Numb. A sitting defense minister using that word in a formal statement is one of the most alarming signals in years. A military that stops reacting to the pattern, stops preparing for the moment when the pattern ends. In the Taiwan Strait, that moment is the one that redefines the entire regional order. The question every serious Pacific analyst is asking is simple on its surface. When does the rehearsal stop being a rehearsal and become the opening act of something permanent? The U.S. Navy has been forced to answer that operationally, quietly, methodically, through concrete deployment changes now visible in Pacific positioning data and public INDOPACOM statements. What those changes look like on the water, what China's newest carrier rewrites in every war scenario, and what Bloomberg's modeling says about the cost of miscalculation. That is next. If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, drop a comment. What do you think China's real operational timeline looks like? The debate in this section is always worth reading. And if this was valuable, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach the audience that needs to be paying attention to what is unfolding in the Pacific right now. Now let's talk about what China actually built, while most of the world was focused on the Taiwan Straits politics. Because the military picture in the Pacific has shifted in ways that go well beyond one set of drills in December. On November 5th, 2025, China commissioned its third aircraft carrier, the Fujian, in a ceremony attended personally by Xi Jinping. That event alone would have rewritten every wargame scenario at INDOPACOM. But the Fujian is only part of the story here. What makes the Fujian categorically different from China's first two carriers is not its size. It is what sits on the flight deck. The Fujian is equipped with 3 electromagnetic catapults, the same launch technology that until now only the United States operated at sea. China's first two carriers, the Liaoning and the Shandong, used ski jump ramps. That design limits the weight of aircraft at the moment of launch. Lighter payload means shorter range, smaller weapons load, and aircraft operating at a structural disadvantage from the moment they leave the deck. The electromagnetic catapult changes that equation entirely. Heavier aircraft launch at full fuel and full weapons capacity on every single sortie. That means the Fujian can operate China's J-35 stealth fighter, its KJ-600 early warning aircraft, and its GJ-11 stealth combat drone at full capability. According to USNI News, the Pentagon's 2025 annual report identified the Fujian commissioning as one of the most significant Chinese military developments of the year. With 3 operational carriers, China has now established itself as the second largest carrier operator in the world, per Naval News reporting in January 2026. But here's the number that should be sitting uncomfortably in every defense ministry from Washington to Tokyo right now. According to the Pentagon's December 2025 report, China plans to field 9 aircraft carriers by 2035. It currently operates 3. That means 6 new carriers in 9 years. The largest carrier construction effort in the Indo-Pacific since World War II, in the Pentagon's own description. The U.S. Congress mandates a minimum fleet of 11 carriers. China's 2035 target would nearly match the entire U.S. Pacific carrier deployment. And alongside the Fujian, the PLA Navy launched the Sichuan, the first Type 076 amphibious assault ship anywhere in the world equipped with electromagnetic catapults. Newsweek's January 2026 analysis described the Sichuan as an aviation-enabled force projection platform for both fixed-wing drones and manned aircraft operating in concert. Naval analysts at USNI describe its significance as extending well beyond a Taiwan scenario, into the South China Sea, the Senkakus, and expeditionary operations further afield. The Type 076 represents a new category of warship, one that blurs the line between amphibious assault ship and light carrier, designed for coordinated multi-ship formations. While all this was commissioned, China's shipyards kept moving. Satellite imagery at Dalian in January 2026 confirmed active construction of what analysts assess as the Type 004 carrier. The Type 04 is projected to be nuclear-powered, making China only the 3rd nation after the US and France to operate nuclear-propelled carriers if confirmed. 1945 reported in February 2026 that the Type 004 could carry more than 100 aircraft, potentially including the J-35 and the 6th-generation J-36 still in development. Now pair all of this with one more data point. As of early 2026, the People's Liberation Army Navy has more than 370 ships and submarines, the largest fleet by hull count globally. The U.S. Navy has been contracting. Analysts have warned for years of what they call the closing Davidson window, Admiral Philip Davidson's 2021 warning to the Senate Armed Services Committee. Davidson told the committee that China would develop the capability and readiness to attempt control of Taiwan within the decade. That window, by his timeline, closes in 2027. The U.S. Navy is projected to fall from 292 ships in 2022 to approximately 280 by 2027, per the Congressional Research Service, even as China's fleet continues rapid expansion. China has also nearly tripled its precision attack missile inventory since 2020, estimated now at approximately 3,500 systems, per analysts tracking the Davidson window. INDOPACOM's own budget testimony to Congress made this explicit. The risk the United States is assuming in the Pacific is high and is currently trending in the wrong direction. The 2026 NDAA authorized $1 billion for the Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative, adding a joint drone program with Taipei and ordering a digital resilience review. Beijing's defense ministry condemned the package publicly, calling it destabilizing and describing it as crossing important thresholds in U.S.-Taiwan military integration. The NDAA also directed combat aircraft back to Kadena in Okinawa, 36 F-15EX Eagle II fighters deploying in spring 2026, replacing the legacy aircraft removed years earlier. Kadena sits approximately 400 miles from Taiwan. Positioning combat aircraft, there is not a paperwork exercise. It is a deterrent statement delivered in jet fuel and sortie rates. Taiwan is also scheduled to receive its first F-16V fighters in 2026, part of a delayed 1066 aircraft order. Full delivery, pushed back by supply chain issues, is now expected in 2027. In my view, what all of this adds up to is a competition that has moved past the phase where one side holds an unchallengeable qualitative edge across all Pacific domains. The U.S. still leads in carrier capability, submarine quality, and the integrated operational experience built through decades of Pacific Alliance exercises. That advantage is real. But it is being compressed deliberately and systematically. And the cost of allowing that compression to reach a tipping point is not measured in ships. It is measured in dollars. On February 10th, 2026, Bloomberg Economics released updated modeling on a U.S.-China conflict over Taiwan. The headline figure stopped economists and analysts in their tracks. In the most extreme scenario, full U.S.-China military conflict, Bloomberg projects the first-year cost to the global economy at $10.6 trillion. That is 9.6% of global GDP. In year one, Bloomberg's framing, it eclipses the economic impact of both the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2008 global financial crisis. Taiwan produces 62% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. TSMC alone generates roughly 70% of global foundry revenue, supplying NVIDIA, Apple, AMD, and Qualcomm. Losing access to Taiwan's chip production would cut global supplies of cutting-edge logic semiconductors by 62%, according to Bloomberg Intelligence and Boston Consulting Group data. Apple faces what Bloomberg describes as the highest systemic risk among major tech firms. Taiwan is the only production center for the advanced chip nodes that power the iPhone at volume. South Korea's GDP could contract 23% in a conflict scenario. Japan's 14.7%. The European Union, 10.9%. These are Bloomberg's baseline war scenario projections. Bloomberg modeled a blockade scenario separately. Even without full-scale conflict, the first-year cost still reaches $5 trillion, larger than Japan's entire annual GDP. What this tells us is that the Taiwan Strait has stopped being a military story with economic implications. It is an economic story with military triggers built directly into it. The question? Every government, every central bank, and every supply chain executive is now quietly asking is the same one. Are those triggers getting closer to being pulled? Now, here is where this story moves from hardware and economics into something more operationally immediate and documented. Because the shift in how the U.S. Navy operates in the Pacific is not theoretical. It is already happening, and it is on record. Start with the Taiwan Strait itself. The U.S. Navy has transited the 110-mile waterway approximately once a month for years. Through 2025, 8 countries made a total of 12 recorded transits of the Taiwan Strait, according to Taiwan's National Security Bureau. Those countries included the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Vietnam. That list matters. Because 5 years ago, transits by non-U.S. nations were rare events. Today, they are a coordinated, documented pattern of Allied presence. According to U.S. Naval Institute proceedings, published in September 2025, analysts are now openly calling for reinstatement of the Taiwan Patrol Force. The Taiwan Patrol Force was a dedicated 7th Fleet Squadron that continuously patrolled the Strait during Cold War crises, disbanded decades ago. The argument being made now in print in a U.S. Navy publication is that monthly rotating transits are no longer sufficient as a deterrence message to Beijing. What analysts are proposing is a permanent multinational rotation, Allied ships on a quarterly schedule, ensuring a coalition warship is present in the Strait at all times. The strategic doctrine behind this operational shift became formally visible on December 4th, 2025, when Trump signed the new U.S. national security strategy. The NSS placed the Western Hemisphere as America's top geographic priority. That sentence generated immediate headlines framing it as an Indo-Pacific retreat, but analysts who read the full document found something different inside the Taiwan section. Language described by foreign policy as unusually dense and deliberate. The NSS stated that deterring a conflict over Taiwan, in its exact words, ideally by preserving military overmatch, was an explicit U.S. national priority. It also committed to pressing First Island chain allies to allow greater U.S. military access to their ports and facilities and to invest in denial-focused deterrence capabilities. The document did shift one word in declaratory policy. Previous administrations said the U.S. would oppose any unilateral change in the strait. The 2025 NSS says it will not support it. That single word change, from oppose to not support, was noticed immediately in Taipei, in Tokyo, and in Beijing. Each capital read the same sentence and drew a different conclusion. The Council on Foreign Relations noted it heightens strategic uncertainty. Taiwan's analysts described it as framing the island primarily in economic terms, rather than as a security commitment. Modern diplomacy described the overall NSS design as deliberately dual-track, elastic declaratory language on the surface, rigid operational deterrence requirements underneath. In plain terms, the words got softer. The military demands on allies got harder, and the gap between those two tracks is exactly where miscalculation finds space to operate. Then came the 2026 National Defense Strategy, released in January. And here, the signal became significantly harder for Pacific allies to explain away or dismiss. The 2026 NDS does not mention Taiwan by name. According to the Atlantic Council, that single omission was the most alarming element of the document for Indo-Pacific partners. It also does not include the Taiwan Strait among the 5 areas where the United States commits to providing critical support in a crisis scenario. The 2018 NDS, from Trump's first term, named China and Russia directly as revisionist powers. The 2026 version removed that framing entirely from its language. Japan described the NDS as partial reassurance. It did not abandon the region entirely. Australia called it encouraging on deterrence, but deeply uncertain on Taiwan specifically. The Stimson Center framed the core concern bluntly. The question is no longer whether the U.S. can deter China. It is whether Taiwan still believes that the U.S. will. Against this backdrop of strategic ambiguity at the policy level, the operational response at the military level has been moving in the opposite direction. The 2026 NDAA directed INDOPACOM to expand its Pacific Deterrence Initiative, with priority given to denial systems, standoff weapons, and unmanned long-range aircraft. Specifically, the legislation emphasized platforms capable of operating outside China's anti-access and area denial zone and submarine capacity inside it. The Philippines has now granted the U.S. access to 9 military bases under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, including 4 in northern Luzon facing Taiwan directly. Luzon sits roughly 200 miles from Taiwan's southern coast. Positioning U.S. logistics and strike assets there changes the response geometry in every Pacific planning scenario. Japan has committed to doubling its defense budget to 2% of GDP by 2027, the largest Japanese military expansion since World War II, driven explicitly by the Taiwan contingency. South Korea, Australia, and Canada have all increased the frequency of Taiwan Strait transits and joint exercises with U.S. Pacific forces across the past 12 months. In September 2025, the UK carrier strike group led by HMS Prince of Wales transited the Taiwan Strait as part of Operation High Mast, a first for a British carrier in the strait in years. That transit was significant not for its military weight, but for its message, that European navies were now treating the strait as a physical presence statement requiring participation. What this creates is a documented and visible tension between 2 simultaneous signals the United States is sending to the region right now, today. At the policy level, Washington is softening language, narrowing explicit commitments, and reframing Taiwan primarily as a semiconductor and economic architecture question. At the operational level, Washington is hardening its forward posture, expanding base access, accelerating allied integration, and increasing coalition presence near the strait. In my view, that combination is not a contradiction. It is a deterrence strategy designed to keep Beijing uncertain about exactly where the American threshold sits. The problem with deliberate ambiguity as a deterrence tool is that it works best when both sides have roughly similar assessments of each other's resolve and red lines. When those assessments diverge, when one side reads the soft words and the other reads the hard military posture, ambiguity stops deterring and starts enabling escalation. China's response to all of this has been consistent, accelerating gray zone activity, increasing median line crossings, and continuing carrier and Type 076 construction on schedule. Beijing is not pausing to assess whether Washington's signals mean more or less commitment. It is treating the entire environment as a competition to be won on its own timeline. And that timeline, the Davidson window, flagged in 2021, closing in 2027, is now less than 2 years from its stated endpoint. That is not an abstraction. That is a calendar date. Here is where everything in this story converges, and where honest analysis has to go beyond hardware, ships, and economic models. The Davidson window is not a conspiracy theory. It is sourced congressional testimony, but it has also been seriously misread by a lot of people. Admiral Davidson told the Senate Armed Services Committee in 2021 that China would develop the capability to attempt control of Taiwan within the decade. Former CIA Director William Burns subsequently clarified the record. 2027 is a military readiness target, a capability milestone, not a confirmed invasion date. That distinction matters enormously, and it is the one most coverage collapses. Capability and intent are different things. Readiness and decision are not the same. The Center for Strategic and International Studies surveyed China experts and found 83% reject the idea that China plans kinetic military action against Taiwan by 2027. ASPI's senior analyst Joe Keary, writing in January 2026, concluded that coercion short of war remains Xi's most likely course of action for the year ahead. The Pentagon's own December 2025 annual report confirms the military is advancing toward 2027 goals, while documenting disruptions from corruption purges inside the PLA. The rocket force, the backbone of China's most dangerous long-range strike capability, has been most affected by those investigations, per the Pentagon's own report. War on the Rocks noted in January 2026 that the Pentagon explicitly warns against assuming purge-related disruptions represent any kind of long-term weakness in Chinese capability. What this means is that the picture is genuinely complex. China is building capability fast while managing institutional turbulence that affects its near-term operational readiness. ASPI identified 7 factors. Xi is weighing military readiness, leadership reliability, U.S. calculus, allied reactions, Taiwan's preparations, domestic conditions, and global context. On nearly all 7 factors, the current environment as of February 2026 contains enough uncertainty to make a near-term military operation carry risks Beijing has not fully resolved. Xi reportedly grew exasperated at a 2024 meeting when U.S. officials repeatedly cited 2027 as an invasion target, stating he had no knowledge of such plans, per responsible statecraft. In my view, the most accurate framing right now is this: China is building the capacity to act while preserving the option not to, until the calculus shifts in its favor. That is fundamentally different from an invasion countdown. It is a slow compression of options. Taiwan's, Washington's, and every allied governments in the region simultaneously. The INSS analysis from January 2026 described 3 simultaneous clocks running in Beijing right now: the military readiness clock, the 2027 Party Congress clock, and a third. The third clock is Taiwan's political trajectory. 4 consecutive DPP victories have reinforced in Beijing the view that peaceful unification is becoming structurally less achievable over time. Each of those clocks ticks at a different speed. What makes the current moment consequential is not that any one clock has run out. It is that all 3 are running simultaneously. Rand Corporation has warned that under current force balances, the U.S. would face serious challenges in a Taiwan conflict. That is a planning-level assessment, not advocacy. It is a signal. In late 2025, Washington approved its largest ever arms package for Taiwan. Hundreds of U.S. military personnel continued training Taiwanese forces both on the island and inside the U.S. Those are not the moves of an administration that has abandoned Taiwan. They are the moves of one managing the commitment differently. Less declaratory clarity, more operational substance. That gap between public language and operational reality is a calculated feature of U.S. strategy. Ambiguity is the tool. The question is whether ambiguity still functions as deterrence here, because Beijing is not operating on ambiguity. It has documented timelines, documented force targets, and documented 2027 military objectives, and is executing steadily against all of them. The Taiwan Strait today carries 2 things simultaneously. It carries the transit of Allied warships, making the statement that this waterway is international and remains open to navigation. And it carries 7 PLA exercises since 2022, a new catapult-equipped carrier, a new amphibious assault platform, and a Pentagon risk assessment trending in the wrong direction. This story is not really about any one ship or radar system or economic projection. It is about whether the mechanisms that prevented great power conflict for 80 years are still holding. Freedom of navigation transits, alliance commitments, strategic ambiguity, economic ties. These are the deterrence architecture keeping the Strait from becoming something far more serious. Each of those mechanisms is under simultaneous pressure, not from one side alone, from the interaction between China's expansion and Washington's deliberate repositioning of its posture. The U.S. carrier in the Strait this week holds one piece of that architecture in place. China's December drills tested how much load the rest of that architecture can carry without fracturing. In my view, the most consequential question of the next 2 years is not whether China will invade Taiwan. Most serious analysts believe it will not, Not yet, not in this window. The real question is whether slow compression of options, normalization of gray zone pressure, and erosion of strategic clarity can push deterrence past a threshold it cannot recover from. An invasion scenario has a visible starting point. Deterrence failure by drift has no single moment, just a sequence of individually manageable steps that collectively cross a line. The 110 miles between China's coast and Taiwan are not simply geography. They are a political statement renewed daily by the decisions of governments and the movement of warships. Right now, as of February 19th, 2026, those decisions are being made simultaneously in Washington, Beijing, Tokyo, Taipei, and on the bridges of ships transiting that contested water. What plays out in that corridor over the next 2 years will shape trade routes, semiconductor supply chains, alliance structures, and deterrence frameworks for a generation to come. There is no clean outcome here. There is no scenario in which this competition resolves without cost to someone. The only real question is which costs are chosen and who absorbs them. Watch this space. What happens in this 110-mile corridor will define the world your children inherit more than almost anything else unfolding on the planet right now.